Be live here. We are live. Hello, Patriots. We meet again. I'm very excited to introduce you to special guest, Arthur T. Bradley, PhD, author, a best-selling author, by the way, NASA engineer. He is, I consider this man an EMP and CME expert, and I believe we're going to learn a lot from him tonight. So, Dr. Bradley, if you would be so kind, could you give us kind of your educational background and what led you into this field of study and such?
Yeah, sure. So educational background. Well, let's see. I do have a PhD in electrical engineering. I went to Auburn University, which is in Alabama, if those know that place. I still love that school. And I've worked for about 30 years in engineering, electronics of one sort or another. I've worked for NASA since 2003, so going on 20 years. I'm a branch head there of a electronics branch. And my expertise within NASA really is electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic compatibility, those sorts of things. That's where I get called in to solve problems in those areas.
Right.
So that's kind of my professional background. I'm a licensed professional engineer, been around for a while, doing this sort of stuff for a while.
Hey, by chance, you don't know Patrick Colbeck, do you?
Don't recognize the name.
He worked on the cable system on the International Space Station. He's a senator here in Michigan. Pretty conservative guy. I like him. I've known Pat for years. Mm-hmm. So you work for NASA currently?
I do. Yep. I work at NASA Langley Research Center.
Yeah. And I just want to, before I forget, I want to put your website on the bottom of the page. I think I did. Is that correct, Doctor?
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's right.
So folks, hopefully I'm hoping we end up with a lot of people here in the chat. I've been pushing this, but disasterpreparer.com. And just to, you're going to find, tell us about your website and the items people will find there.
Yeah. So I started that website, oh gosh, I don't know. It's been a handful of years ago or more, with just some of the books I'd written. I've written about 15 different books related to EMPs and disaster preparedness, and some fiction books as well. And so I started just sort of putting the books out there. And then I really got into preparing for electromagnetic pulse attacks, and my expertise is in that area. So I thought maybe I could help dispel some myths and answer some questions, and maybe develop some products that would be helpful. So people had a lot of questions about Faraday cages and, how do you protect your cars and your solar panels and all those other things. So I started doing YouTube videos on them. And so I have a YouTube channel, EMP Doctor, if you want to find it out there. But anyway, you can search my name in YouTube, it'll pop up.
Right.
And I did a bunch of videos on, how to protect yourself from an EMP. And then I created some products, and a lot of those products are on that disasterpreparer.com website. Everything from things that help protect your cars to cloth that you can drape over generators. There's just a lot of different things that I tested out to see what works and what doesn't work, and offered some products I thought would be helpful to people.
I just, real quick, you will find Dr. Bradley is the EMP Doctor here on YouTube. That's his page. The link is in the description, by the way. And then and you wrote a few books. Not only, I was looking at the fiction series that you wrote. That looks interesting. I think I'm going to check that out. And then real quick, if I can share this, I think I got I think I have your main website on here. I do. Make sure everybody's seeing that. So there,
that's just some of the books that I've written. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of great information here, by the way, folks. I am going to look at some of his EMP protection. There's EMP vehicle protection, generator protection, whole house protection, and the like. Let me get rid of that.
Yeah, so I try and do, like, for a lot of those products, I try and show on YouTube, how I test them, and so that people understand how they work. And because there's a lot of hype around EMP and a lot of stuff that people don't really understand. So I try and help people get a better handle on what's effective.
All right. I have some notes here from about 3 articles. And then I think this was a government report. It was a slideshow. You may recognize it when I mention it. It was this slideshow was NPS not sure what this stands for, CHDS 10th Anniversary Homeland Defense and Security Education Summit, Effects of and Response to Electromagnetic Pulse. George Lane is one of the presenters, Director of Chemical Security, and a couple other guys. But I just had a couple questions from this report. In 1859, there was the Carrington event, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Right, it was a large CME, yeah.
It was a large geomagnetic solar storm that caused a solar CME that struck Earth's magnetosphere on September 1st, 1859, and induced one of the largest geomagnetic storms on record. And just to give people the idea, now this is 1859, folks. Before dawn the next day, skies all over Earth erupted in red, green, and purple auroras, so brilliant that newspapers could be read at night in Cuba, the Bahamas, Jamaica, El Salvador, and Hawaii. Even when telegraphers disconnected the batteries, aurora-induced electric currents in the wires still transmitted the messages. So my question was to you on this. What if the Carrington event happened today with modern electronics, right? Because this was 1859, and it hits a major continent. I mean, America, Europe, China, Russia. What would be the effects of that?
Well, so no one's certain because it hasn't happened in our modern era, but there's a lot of predictions about it. The big thing to understand is that a CME is a low frequency event, meaning that the energy is low frequency. So it couples really well into long conductors, which is like a telegraph system or a power, the grid, the utility grid. So that's where the energy would couple into, and you would get, huge voltage differences and huge currents flowing that you didn't normally have. And so you would take down a lot. The thinking is you would take out a lot of the electrical grid, if not all of the electrical grid of the area affected. And that's the biggest worry, is that you end up taking out some of these large transformers. And transformer is just a fancy word for something that takes one voltage and turns it into a different voltage. And those transformers are critical to delivering power to different places. And if you take out these large transformers, they're the size of large buildings, they're very, very difficult to replace or repair. And so that's where the worry is that if you take out enough of those transformers, you can't bring back up the grid. And essentially we could be in a long duration blackout. And that's the biggest worry of all. There is quite a bit of damage that could occur to systems other than the grid as well. Any kind of control system that's connected to very long conductors, they call them SCADAs, which are supervisory control systems for water filtration systems. You can just go any kind of utility type system are controlled by these SCADAs, and they're susceptible to damage. So you could have a widespread disruption of infrastructures of all sorts. And nobody knows how long it would be, to recover from that sort of event. So, the one thing to remember about about a CME, a solar event, is it doesn't couple into small electronics. So it won't go into your cell phone, it won't go into your laptop or your car. As long as they're not connected to a very, very long conductor, they wouldn't be affected.
Okay, I have a couple points on that. The transformers, the substations and seeing those mega transformers. Like here in northern Michigan, I'm in a rural area, but there'll be those chain linked in areas with like the substations or whatever.
Yeah.
I hear every one of those is unique to their part in the grid. So can you dispel if that's true or not? And then the other thing I hear, because this is truly critical infrastructure to the health of the United States, that these transformers are built in China. And in some cases, like these massive ones that you're talking about, they can take a year or two to get them when we don't have supply line problems.
Yeah, so some of that I think is conjecture because I don't really know, and I think many people don't really know. But I've heard those same sorts of things. I doubt that each and every transformer substation is unique because it just wouldn't be efficient for manufacture. Probably more likely they're configured in a unique way in terms of their load and things like that. But I have heard and have read several places that the large, critical transformer elements, which are these buildings, are built overseas. Though I don't know that they're built in China. I don't even know that it matters. They're not built in the United States.
Right, exactly.
We don't have many spares of them.
Right.
And so the theory is that if you took out a large number of them, you couldn't recover. And I have heard that prediction that it could take up to a year.
And
I don't
and
know if
I've
that's
heard on that,
pessimistic or not, but
I've heard that if I've heard this, I've read this in several places over
Mhm.
the last few years, that
Yeah.
if the grid goes down for 1 year, no electric, that 90% of Americans would be dead.
Yeah, I've read that as well. I'm not sure I believe it. I think it would be horrible. Don't get me wrong. I think it would
Right.
be unlike anything we'd ever seen. But we live in such an interconnected world right now. I'm not sure that other countries and other entities wouldn't come to aid and maybe help people survive
Well,
by bringing emergency
we've
supplies.
certainly helped the world out. They owe
Yeah,
us.
yeah, and you would
Right.
think some of that goodwill might come back, but I don't mean to make light of it at all.
No.
I think it would be a horrific event with huge losses of life if we had a
I
long
mean, if
duration
it was 50%, that would be
That's
over
still a lot of
100.
people. That's
It's over
165
100.
million people.
Right. Yep. Um, okay. So, and then the other thing with the CME, and I think I heard you talking about this on Gray Man Prepping. We will have some leeway in time. We know it's coming,
Mhm.
right? Because we
Yeah.
follow the sunspots or whatever happens.
Yeah,
And
so we have satellites that watch the sun. A number of them, GOES and others, and they're NASA satellites that watch these eruptions, and we can detect when a large disturbance occurs and a CME is coming our way. Now, there's different kinds of solar events. There's solar flares, which travel roughly at the speed of light, so you really don't get much warning for a solar flare because we can't radio back any faster than that, and so they kind of arrive by surprise. But the solar flares often warn us that, hey, something else is coming behind the solar flare. And that's these big CMEs, these big charged plasma blobs that come floating over the Earth. And those typically give you a couple of days warning. You can see them coming toward you. So we would have some advance warning of the CME.
Doctor, do you see that slide I just put up?
I do.
Is that it? That's the sun. Is it like a big burst of radiation? I mean, exactly.
Yeah,
What is
well,
it?
so the solar flare is basically radiation. And that's what would come up. And that the risk of a solar flare is disruption to radio communications, damage to maybe satellites, maybe some hazards for astronauts. Solar flares do those things. But coronal mass ejections are big plasma, which is just charged gases, really, that would then come over the Earth, and they wash around the Earth, and they disturb our magnetic field lines. And that creates currents that flow on the surface of the Earth, and that can cause all kinds of problems for us. And even
And
though
then
they're coming, it's an interesting thing. You don't know what effect they're going to have. I asked some experts at one of the conferences, one of the blackout conferences, about that, and he said, "Yeah, we know they're coming, but even with our best predictions and all of our measurements, it might be less than an hour. We would know." Have a less than an hour warning that, hey, this is going to be really bad on the electrical grid or something like
boy.
that. It's a very complex problem to understand.
That was my
So they
other
can't
question,
predict it well.
Doctor. I thought since we had maybe some leeway, could the
Mhm.
governments, the power companies, like throw breakers and like
Yeah.
shut the grid down and protect it?
Yeah, and you would think that would be the best way, right? If you knew a big CME was coming, you'd power everything down. Of course, you don't know what the effect of the CME is, and I believe that even if if the system were brought down and switches were open, you still end up being potentially able to damage the electrical grid, even with it unpowered. So one of the reports I read said it doesn't make any difference whether it's powered or not. That this
Okay.
energy is still going to flow through the system, and you're still going to take out transformers and everything
All
else.
right.
So,
What about my main breaker box in my home, Doctor? I flipped the
Mhm.
switch and shut the house off.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea.
Okay.
Because again, you now disconnect your home from those very long conductors, right? So your home is
Right.
basically immune to a CME until it's connected to the grid, and then all bets are off.
Then I have a question. You got the big overhead power lines, but what
Yeah,
about the buried underground
Mhm.
power lines? Are they affected as well?
They can be. Yeah, energy can couple into buried conductors as well, and not just power lines into pipelines of various sorts. You can get currents flowing along those pipelines. So the Earth is a weak conductor. It does help shield somewhat, but you certainly can induce currents into buried items as well.
All right. Continuing with this article, so everybody's kind of got and now the Carrington event was 1859. Are we
Yeah.
due for an event again?
Yeah, we are. There about every 150 years, you end up with a Carrington style event. And so you can do the math and you can say, we're a little bit past due, actually.
Right.
Which, now statistically, it could be another 100 years from now, or it could be tomorrow. But just based on history, we would say that, yeah, it's about, probably about time to have another large CME hit the Earth.
Okay. Now I want to get into electromagnetic pulse and just a little history that I did on and this is from the slideshow, which I knew about some of this stuff from a book I wrote, a science fiction book. During the first U.S. nuclear test on July 16th, 1945, Trinity, kind of a famous nuclear test, electronics were shielded because Dr. Enrico Fermi awarded the 1938 Nobel Prize for Physics in induced radioactivity. It anticipated an EMP. However, electronics were still damaged. Instrument failures during British nuclear test in 1952 revealed radio flash, the British term for an EMP. Then this was a kind of a major one. An artificial radiation belt was created by the Starfish Prime, 1.44 megaton nuclear test, 400 kilometers over Johnston Island in the Pacific Ocean on July 9th, 1962. Starfish Prime demonstrated that the magnitude of high altitude nuclear explosions generate EMPs were much greater than had been previously calculated. Starfish Prime generated an EMP that was created an artificial aurora seen in Hawaii 900 miles away, affected the power grid in Hawaii, and knocked out 1 Soviet and 6 U.S. satellites, including Telstar 1, the first communication satellite. If Starfish Prime, and I found this interesting, had been detonated over the northern continental U.S., the EMP would have been much larger because the Earth's magnetic field is twice the strength there. Earth's magnetic field doubles in intensity from the equator to the poles. Consequently, the effects of an EMP or GMD increases proportionately at higher latitudes. And then one last one real quick was in 1962, the Soviet Union performed a nuclear test in space that produced EMPs in the K project over Kazakhstan. Although these weapons were much smaller than those used in Starfish Prime, 300 kilotons, they were detonated over a populated area and at a location where the Earth's magnetic field was greater. The missiles were launched from the east of Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad, created an EMP much greater than in Starfish Prime. The geomagnetic storm, like EMP, induced an electronic current surge in long underground power lines, causing a fire in a power plant in Kazakhstan. So this is a similar question that I had with the coronal mass ejection from the late 1800s. This is 1962, 1952. Electronics have advanced a long way since then, right?
Sure.
So what happens with an EMP in today's world?
Yeah. So again, I can't say anyone knows for certain, but we have done a lot of tests on EMPs. There was the Trestle project where they built a big wooden structure to test the effects of EMP on military hardware. And there's a lot of simulation work done today to measure those effects and determine what they'd be. And the short answer is it would be a lot worse because, of course, we've got these very modern solid-state conductors, transistors, diodes, microprocessors. Everywhere you look, there's a microprocessor doing something, right? My computer here, your phone, everybody's got microprocessors. Our cars are filled with them. And those are very susceptible to overvoltage conditions, which an EMP would generate. And so unlike a solar event, an EMP has broadband energy, meaning it has low frequency content and it has high frequency content everywhere in between. And so it can couple into small things like your phone or your laptop, cars, as well as energy into long conductors like the power grid. So it sort of spans the entire spectrum of what it could hit. The effects could be catastrophic because not only could you take down the grid just like a CME could, but now you can damage all kinds of other infrastructure as well, from personal vehicles to electronics to home appliances. Everywhere across the country could be affected in some way. And now that just compounds the disaster that we just talked about a minute ago. So an EMP would be serious business. Yeah.
Could you explain this and this is from this slide presentation. It says a nuclear EMP is a complex multi-phase pulse, usually described in 3 components defined by the International Electrotechnical Commission as E1 early time, E2 intermediate time, and E3 late time. Could you explain those 3?
Sure. Yeah, so that's right. You usually see a little waveform drawn of what an EMP looks like, and it has three pieces to it. There's a very brief pulse that occurs first, and in many ways, it's the most damaging. It's the most damaging to all the small scale electronics. You're talking about something that might take a few nanoseconds to rise up tens of thousands of volts per meter, and then a few nanoseconds to come back down. So it's a very, very narrow in time. And what that does is it couples energy like a spark gap would into small scale electronics, and it can cause lots and lots of damage. And then there's an E2, which is like a middle duration pulse that occurs, and it's very similar to lightning in terms of its spectrum, what it puts out. And by itself, it probably wouldn't be that destructive, but once E1 has already done some damage to things, now everything's more susceptible to this moderate pulse. And then oh, go ahead.
Are these like hitting right about the same time?
Yeah, they're all actually stuck together in time.
Okay.
They spread it out so you can kind of see the pulse and then the medium pulse and then the slow pulse, but it's all one pulse, and it just has different components to it in time. So the first one is nanoseconds wide, maybe totally 20 nanoseconds wide. The second one is microseconds wide, which is similar to what a lightning pulse might be. And then the last one can be seconds or even minutes or hours long, or you end up with a very slow pulse that effectively puts voltages on lines and circles currents in loops. And so that pulse can cause damage to things like the power grid. And so E1 affects small electronics, E2 is kind of like a lightning event, and E3 affects very, very long conductors.
Okay. And then, I read at the end of this article, and I didn't know this, because I think America's grid is our Achilles heel.
Yeah.
It should have been hardened years ago, but they're too interested in giving people free stuff and, the social engineering of our government instead of doing what the government should do and protecting us. But it did say in this article, and I'd never heard this, 12 states protect their power grids from EMPs.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I've never seen the details of it. I've known a person or two that work for utility companies, and they said they were aware of some protections being put in, but I don't know what they are. I don't know exactly what protections they offer.
And I will, the conclusion of this report said the 9/11 Commission report called the attacks on September 11th, 2001, a failure of imagination, a failure to imagine the use of airplanes as a weapon. It would be another failure of imagination, I would say a much greater one, not to plan for the possibility of an EMP attack. And it also said that the terrorist cheap way of hitting us with the EMP, it mentioned a weather balloon, is that a weather balloon could get it to like a high enough altitude, like off the East Coast. They could say they're launching a weather balloon, and in fact, it's pulling, it's lifting up this weapon.
Yeah, I've read that before. And as long as they got up above the source region, so if they could get up, 50 miles or something into the atmosphere, theoretically it could be done. There's some loss of control when you do that. I'm not sure if it would be quite as effective in terms of targeting somewhere. But yeah, there's lots of ways to deliver it. You just have to get up high enough. You have to get a nuclear weapon up high enough before you detonate it.
Okay, and I've heard, I can't see that picture, but what's the International Space Station at? Like 200 miles above Earth?
I'm not. Yeah, it sounds about right. I
think.
And
is that kind of, if you're going to take out all of America and you got like over Kansas or somewhere in
central U.S. somewhere,
and maybe a couple hundred miles high, would that be like the?
Yeah, that's about right. Is you want to be on that order of 100 miles, 200 miles high to get where your line of sight. It's a line of sight weapon, and so where your line of sight essentially covers the United States, mainland United States.
Before I forget this question, because I wrote a note and I did some research on this back a few years ago. Our new power plants, is my understanding, depend on a working grid. Okay. This is what I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong. So my question is, if the grid goes down and it's going to be out for a long time, I would assume they got backup generators to run their cooling pumps. Will generators be affected by an EMP?
Yes. So the whole question of nuclear power plants is one I looked into, I guess it's been about 3 years ago. I actually called one of the chiefs, if you will, of one of the nuclear power plants, and I interviewed him for a couple of hours and asked him a lot of questions. I wrote an article on it. If you search the web, you can probably find it somewhere. But anyway, And I asked him those questions of, hey, if we have an EMP, and he didn't even really know what an EMP was, but we discussed it. And I said, let's just assume you lost the grid. No damage to your equipment, but you've lost the grid. Let's start there. What would you do? And he went through the various, they have basically 4 levels of protection that they have. And the key, of course, is to keep the reactor, be able to bring down the reactor safely. And that takes a few days. And so they have to have some electricity to do that, to bring the cooling system, continue the cooling system. And then even after that, they can take the rods out and they can store them in these big pools of water with boric acid and but then they still have to circulate for quite a long time, for years. They have to keep that circulation system going. And if they don't, well, if they don't keep the rods cool in the reactor, you have the meltdown problems, and you don't want that for sure. If you don't keep them cool in the pools, they boil off the water and then they potentially explode, and you end up with radiation release that way. So it's bad news all the way around.
Right.
The good news was they had lots of safety. They have a dead man for the reactor. So even as soon as power fails, it immediately stops the process, the fission process. And, there's all these sort of mechanisms they have in place. But they do rely on their huge generators on site. They have these huge generators on site. And I said, well, what happens if your generator is damaged? Let's say the EMP damages the generator, takes out your blackout, and then the generators are taken out. He said, well, we have portable generators we can roll out. They're not connected to anything. We can roll them out. We can connect them up. And he said they have to have fuel brought in, but we can run them. We keep on site like 45 days of fuel. So it seemed like very unlikely you would damage the portable generators, since they have no solid state electronics and all of that. So for a period of time, I think they could keep the cooling systems running the period of like 40 something days. But in that window of time, our roughly 100 nuclear power plants around the country, you'd have to get fuel to them and get, secondary systems in place.
And that's a problem, because fuel pumps at fueling stations are not working.
Yeah, it would have to become a national priority where, essentially the military or whatever had to retrieve those fuel. And
I hope our government.
Yeah, you hope they have that, right?
I hope they have strategized all this stuff and have a plan in place. I hope,
because their last resort was, they flood the systems where they, a lot of these plants are near bodies of water, and they have ways of flooding the system. They don't need government permission to do that either, he said. If they feel like that they have to do it, they can flood them. But that's a worst case, oh crap, we're in big trouble.
We actually have fuel rods. Here I am in northern Michigan by Lake Michigan, up, if you know where Charlevoix, Traverse City, kind of up on the little south of the Straits of Mackinac, okay, maybe 100 miles or so. But we had a Rocky Point or something, small nuclear plant. It was here forever, Little Rock or something. And a guy, my wife has chickens. We have sell eggs, Mm-hmm. And I asked him, I go, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm working up here at this old nuke plant. And I go, I thought they tore that down. It's out of here. He goes, no, all the fuel rods are there. Mm-hmm. They tore this down years ago. Mm-hmm. And I go, he goes, I'm security. We've got to watch it. Matter of fact, some friends started to ride their bike down there this fall. There's a chain link fence. They went down the road. That was a mistake, by the way. They got a lot of questions asked.
It's a weird thing, because our rods are these rods that are eventually pulled out of the pools of water. They get stored in big concrete casts.
Well, what he said is that there's a moratorium on moving nuke stuff. So exactly. It's there.
So they store them on site in these big concrete vaults. And that's a whole nother worry in its own right.
I asked him, could terrorists come in there and, like make a dirty bomb or something? And he said they weigh like tons or something. He said, you're not going to get one loaded in the back of your pickup truck.
Well, and you'd probably be dead by the time you got somewhere anyway. So,
and I read an article on a book, Physics for Future Presidents. I can't remember who the author was, but he said a dirty bomb was just nothing to really worry about. They're not easy to make. They're not overly destructive to get them to disperse right and everything. Yeah. It's more of a psychological.
It's a terrorism type thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Weapon. Oh, before I forget, Joy Gibson wanted me to ask you this the other day. She wants to know, and this would be whether you've got just a generator that a little rollout generator that you plug in when the power goes out, or what if you've got the whole house generator that's wired into your home? Yeah. What would happen to either one of those generators?
Yeah, so the small portable generators that you just roll out, like a Briggs and Stratton with the little pull cords and things.
Yeah, a little 4,500,
Yeah, they're very unlikely to be damaged by an EMP. They just don't have electronics that can be taken out. Now, the whole house generators are a little bit different. in that they, depends on how they're done, but they can essentially take in energy, and they can be damaged. They're still not that susceptible because they're pretty simple things, but they have automatic transfer switches and things that kick over. So a lot of people will, they'll put ferrites on the power wires that come over from the large standby generators as they come into the breaker panel. And I think there's a video on YouTube where I talk about portable generators versus standby generators, what you can do for them.
Folks, at the end of this, I want to talk to the doctor about the products he sells, because I was looking at, I'm pretty good with electrical stuff. I've wired homes and stuff. It looks like they're a little collar that goes around the main wires.
Yeah,
and it didn't look like it would be overly hard. I mean, if you don't have any electrical background, folks, get an electrician, because you're dealing with high voltage. But and they weren't overly expensive. So if I put those on my house, doctor, is that going to protect my home from a surge?
Well, so there's 3 steps to protecting the home that I recommend for folks. One is you put on a surge protector at the breaker panel. That's the first step. And I really like, there's a product called the Siemens FS140. FS stands for First Surge. So it's a Siemens First Surge 140. I don't make it. I don't sell it. But you can find it on Amazon or Lowe's or Home Depot.
And is this something I'm going to have to get an electrical contractor to install?
Well, it can mount easily on the wall beside the breaker panel, or in my case, I had enough room in the panel. I mounted it inside the panel. I did my own work because I'm pretty savvy with electrical stuff, but most people would be better served just having an electrician come in and wire it up. It goes to a secondary breaker, 20 or 30 amp breaker, and its job is to essentially keep any transients from coming into your home. It stops it at the breaker panel. And so they're very useful for lightning protection and things like that. And they're very useful as well for EMP protection. So I do recommend that as the first step.
I'm gonna do this for sure. And that I think I watched the video. That's not very expensive.
It's a couple $100 for a
so just to give the listeners here an idea of cost to protect your home. If you get the surge protector and the suppressors,
Yeah, so you put the surge protectors about $200. The ferrites, you get 3 of them, one for each of the feeds coming into the house.
So the 2 mains in the ground?
Yes. Line 1, line 2, neutral.
Yep.
And so they cost $49 a piece. So what is that? That's $350. And then depending on, that essentially is what you put at your breaker panel. If you want to do other protections in your home, let's say you have something very sensitive, you can then put smaller ferrites around power cords of appliances and things like that. You can take your radio system, like your handheld radios, and put them into an EMP bag or something to give it some additional protection. So there's some secondary things you can do for specific pieces of equipment. But the big thing is that, at the breaker panel, you use the ferrites and the surge protector.
So, I mean, this is, and for what the dollars buy you today, seems like a pretty good value.
Agreed.
Kung Fu Master here says, talk about gravity batteries. I don't even know what that is.
I don't know what a gravity battery is either, to be honest.
Let me ask you this. Are batteries affected by an EMP?
Depends on the type of battery. Standard,
it's like solar panels, right? They have these big battery packs.
Yeah. So let's start with the easy ones first. The small alkaline batteries, like 9 volts, D cells, AA's, those things, those are not affected.
Battery things, right?
Yeah. Those batteries are not affected by an EMP as long as they're not in anything. If they're just sitting on the, in your drawer.
Well, let me ask you this: if I got, a flashlight with 2 D batteries in it, is it still going to work?
Maybe. There's a chance it could be damaged because now you have a closed loop of a LED bulb, maybe, and there's a chance that you could take it out. When the batteries are not in anything, they're essentially not able to be damaged. Once you put them in a piece of electronics, depending on how big the electronics is, you get some currents that start flowing, you can damage batteries, like a solar power.
If I leave the 2D batteries, this example, out of the flashlight, there's no batteries in the flashlight, then I'm good?
It can still be damaged, believe it or not.
It can still be damaged.
Yeah, because the source of the damage is not the batteries. It's the energy that's coupling into the system. So you can completely power down systems and they can still be damaged by an EMP, which is a shame. It's a darn shame. But batteries by themselves.
This is why Faraday cages, which people are going to learn
that's why
about
Faraday
tonight.
cages are used. Yeah.
Right. And explain a simple Faraday cage.
Yeah, a Faraday cage is really just an enclosed conductive box. It can be any shape. It just needs to be a fully conductive material all the way around.
An inexpensive Faraday cage would be a steel garbage can from one of the big box stores.
Yep. A lot of people use galvanized garbage cans for a Faraday cage. The only thing I'll say about Faraday cages is, any practical Faraday cage has to have a door or an opening somehow, right? Because otherwise you can't get in it.
And on the garbage, it's not as simple as just putting your electronics in the garbage can. You have to insulate it with something, right?
Well, maybe there's a lot of talk about that.
You don't have to.
Well, if the electronics is already in a plastic housing, like, many of my cell phones already got material around it that's not conductive, I can place it right down in the Faraday cage and it's fine.
Okay.
If it has an exposed antenna or an exposed charging port, then yeah, you definitely want to make sure you've lined the inside of the can. So most people, out of abundance of caution, they just line the inside of the can with cardboard, call it a day.
All right. Just some sort of insulator.
Yeah, some sort of insulator. The thing about Faraday cages is to pay special attention to the lid, because like the galvanized garbage can, for example, if the can's lid goes on, even if it's tight, that small seam around the lid can leak in a lot of RF energy. And in fact, you can end up still getting damaged equipment inside.
Wow.
So many people take like aluminum duct tape and they tape the outside of the can, right around the ring of the lid. And then that does great. There's also conductive gaskets. We sell some on the disaster repair website where you put gaskets on the inside of the lid and then it just goes on and off, and it seals up each time.
I've got a 55-gallon drum from a fruit packing company that was, I think they get cherries, and it was like a food grade 55-gallon drum. And it's got the lid that goes on with that steel band with like the handle. You can snap it tight. Do I need to do anything else with that? Or
is that a metal container?
It is.
Oh, the whole thing.
Metal 55-gallon drum.
Yeah, it's probably fine then, because those create pretty darn good seals. A lot of people think if it's watertight, it's pretty good in terms of RF shielding as well, and that's a pretty good rule of thumb. I just always, when we do on classes on Faraday cages where we build them in the class and then we test them, like to show how well they work with test equipment. And it's always the lids that end up compromising. And we'll make an adjustment to the lid and all of a sudden it works fantastic. And so that's what I'll just leave you with.
How do you test it?
You use some special test equipment. You take a generator to generate a signal. And then you use an antenna to broadcast the signal. And then you have this receiving device called a spectrum analyzer that you put inside the Faraday cage. And so you broadcast the energy and you see how much gets inside and you can calculate what the shielding is.
Okay. I'm amazed. So you're telling me if that lid is...
That's the tiniest little sliver is enough to get the energy. It's called a slot antenna, and RF energy goes really well through it. It can make the difference between the Faraday cage being fantastic or just kind of mediocre. So I always tell people to pay extra special attention to the long, narrow seams. It's not the holes that get you. You can take an 1/8-inch drill bit and start drilling some holes in your Faraday cage, and it really doesn't hurt it very much in terms of its shielding. It's an interesting experiment. But as soon as you take an X-Acto knife and you carve a slit in it, the shielding can go to almost nothing. So
hey folks,
pay attention to that.
When you have time, go on YouTube to the EMP Doctor. Just go up in the YouTube search bar and put EMP Doctor. And Dr. Bradley has a bunch of videos on testing what works, what doesn't. You test products for companies, right?
Yeah. I test basically anything I recommend. I try and test first.
Hey, Kelly Campbell has a question, Doctor. If I park my vehicle in a pole barn, which I assume which is what I'm in right now, I'm on my barn office, steel roof, steel sidewalls, cement floor. So she says, if I park my vehicle in a pole barn, will it be safe? And where can I put my cell phone to protect it? And how long before it's safe to use again? That's a good question,
things like pole barns, like metal buildings like that, they do give some shielding. Every situation is different because it depends on if it has windows and how the seams are done. But they might give you between 10 and 20 dB of shielding, which 20 dB is 90%. So 90% of the signal would be reduced. So that's certainly helpful, right? So would a car survive if it's parked in there? Probably. There's no guarantee that it would, but it would certainly be better off than if it wasn't.
This is frightening.
It's a little scary. Now, as far as the phones, the easiest way to protect the phones is to just get a small conductive pouch. There's some on my website, but they're all over the place. These small conductive pouches that you can just put your phone in and put a little Velcro flap over the top, and they shield the phone well enough that an EMP would not bother the phone.
I was reading one of these articles too. It said a microwave is actually can be a Faraday cage.
Yeah, I tested one years back for my book. I've got an EMP book, and we tested oh, let's see, gun safes and microwaves and, all kinds of different, just sort of routine things around the house. And microwave does pretty good, as you'd expect, right?
Right,
It's not designed for the frequencies of an EMP, but it still does pretty good shielding. So if in the case that you don't have anything else you can use, unplug the microwave, put your stuff in it, and close the door, you got some good shielding there.
Right. My biggest fear is with if you're not having a Faraday cage and just protecting this stuff, when an EMP hits, we're not going to know about it. We're not going to have any headwind that it's coming. It's going to be, and that's going to be it. Right. So let me scan down here. I got some other articles because I have some hopefully you have the time. I want to ask you these questions. I just want to see if anybody else. Aloha Proper, Patriot from Hawaii here. Do people need to protect our physical bodies during an EMP or just our electronics? I know the answer, but I will let you answer that.
Yeah, an EMP is not going to damage people. It's not going to harm anybody. The E1 pulse is way too brief in time for your cells to be affected. And E2, like I said, is very similar to like a lightning strike nearby. We're not harmed by that from the electromagnetic wave.
Okay, so Fluffy and the pets and my dog and
they'll be all okay.
Honey Bunny, our rabbit, and they're all fine people.
They'll all be fine. Yeah.
So this is my wife here. She says, will an EMP affect pacemakers and defibrillators?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did an analysis of a Medtronic a few years back, and it looked like a Medtronic would survive that particular one that they had sent me the data on. But there is some chance that pacemakers, defibrillators, other medical equipment could be harmed, or at least go into like a reset mode or something like that. Now, pacemakers in particular are designed to withstand high electromagnetic fields without being damaged, because obviously, you don't want to have that changed out. So my guess is most of them would survive it. They might go into a reset mode where they had to be, adjusted or reset in some way, but I think most would survive.
Stacy Hendricks, thanks for the super sticker. I just seen something on, let me find this post. Gingerly, I'm really just disappointed with our government, doctor. This is a serious threat. I mean, this is really I think it's like one of the top threats to this country. Our government's known about this for years, but they've did nothing.
Yeah.
I know Trump signed, I've got it here somewhere in 2019.
Yeah.
But since he,
order.
Since November 3, I think none of that stuff's happening.
I don't think much came of it. I was aware of the executive order too, but the next preparation, there could be things occurring behind the scenes that you and I don't get to see, but I would agree with you. It does seem like it's falling on deaf ears.
Our military jets, I think, and like Air Force One, they're protected against EMP. Hey, and I was looking for an article. Maybe you can tell me if this was true or not. I heard there was a Russian pilot that defected in a MiG. I don't know where he landed, but we got the plane and got to look at it. And they were looking through it, and it was like vacuum tubes, right, inside tin protectors and stuff. And, we've got solid state stuff. They said, what's up with the vacuum tubes? And the pilot said, don't you know about EMPs? Did you ever hear that story? I don't know if that's true or not.
I haven't heard that story. I have seen old Soviet, electronic equipment, and there was a lot of vacuum tubes and very complex cable harnesses. We did a lot of military testing of EMP though with the trestle, so I would guess that our military planes, helicopters, things like that are probably pretty hard. Okay,
I have these are some articles. Now these first two are from Epic Times. One is this is this year, November 26th, so a little over a week ago, and the other one is December 1st, just a couple days ago. Actually, I'll do that one first. Just made some highlights here. Here, the headline was surprise electromagnetic attack from China, part of Beijing's new blitzkrieg strategy. An EMP attack centered over New York City could cover the entirety of the northeastern United States, paralyzing the power grid and sparking mass chaos. I'm just some of the stuff I highlighted here. The risk of an EMP attack on U.S. infrastructure is very high, particularly in this international environment. This said Sam Kessler, a geopolitical advisor at North Star Support Group, a multinational risk management firm. Peter Pry, which I've heard that name before.
Yeah, I've met him before.
Okay. It's talking about EMP, and it says such an attack, if centered over New York City, for example, would cover the entirety of the northeastern United States, according to a statement to Congress by Peter Pry, an EMP expert and executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, an advisory body. In a slideshow deck from 2018, Pry said that a high altitude EMP blast could knock out 74.4% of the U.S. power generation capacity. Is that scenario plausible?
Yeah, I think that scenario is plausible, sure.
That's frightening. Such an attack could cause month-long losses of electric power and create cascading effects in food, water, and heat supplies and result in a mass loss of life. Just a couple. I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm just going to read the parts I highlighted. EMP weapons offer Russia, China, and the ICBM armed rogue states, like I guess North Korea, a fast, cheap, and effective means to make most Americans feel immediately the horrors of war. In a report compiled by Pry in June of 2020, so just last year, he said that China assuredly already has super EMPs in its possession. And that was one of my questions. What is a super EMP?
Yeah, it's a specific weapon. It's a term they use to describe a specific weapon, a nuclear detonating weapon that its purpose is to generate an EMP, not a side effect of it, but its sole purpose is. So it generates essentially a stronger electromagnetic wave at the surface. So instead of, let's say, 50,000 volts per meter, which has kind of always been the number tossed around as worst case, maybe it's 100,000 or 150,000 volts per meter, which is that much worse than what the 50,000 was. And so
this is different. These nuclear EMP tests of the 50s or whatever. This is a whole nother.
Oh yeah, this is far, far worse than that. Yeah, I think the Starfish Prime was something like 20,000 volts per meter. It's been a while since I looked at that.
And what do you think a super EMP would be?
Well, you hear numbers as high as 200,000 volts per meter. So I don't know that anybody knows it, but it's the numbers that you hear tossed around. So it would be very damaging.
I want to remember if I don't find the part, because it said there's particles in space and it's going to take out satellites.
Yeah, you can take out satellites too from an EMP. Sure can.
Wow. Says Taiwan military intelligence and open sources credits China with having a super EMP nuclear weapon based on design information stolen from us, of course, stolen from U.S. nuclear weapons labs, the report says. Two congressional commissions, known as the EMP commissions, were established to research the destructive potential of EMPs starting in 2001. The first report from those commissions came in 2004 and found that China and Russia have considered limited nuclear attack options that, unlike their Cold War plans, employ EMP as the primary or sole means of attack. You know, I'm thinking as I'm doing my research, why launch a full-out nuclear attack on, say, America and wipe out all the cities when you can kill the grid and 90% of them are dead in 12 months? This is really frightening.
Oh yeah, no, and it could be part of a multi-stage war too, right? Where maybe it's to soften up the target before you do something else. But keep in mind, we have those weapons too, so it's going to be going both directions, right?
Right. I had wrote, and I'm not going to get into this, but just tell you my scenario, because I'm kind of an evil genius. It took me 13 years to write. If you like the learning Earth's deathly history. If you like the Matrix, you know, in the Matrix we were human batteries, right? Well, in learning Earth's deathly history, we're still in a matrix, but we're learning how humanity destroyed Earth. So just a different. But in my book, I snuck a Russia Delta III submarine. Let me get rid of that. I'm sorry. In the belly of a Chinese ore freighter going up to Marquette through the Great Lakes. And the sub, you know, Trojan horse, sneaks down to Chicago and launches an EMP warhead that shadows a Dreamliner, like over Kansas, and then goes up into the air, you know, the 200 miles above Earth or whatever, and detonates. So I had jets falling out of the sky, right, from the EMP. Is that a scenario, or jets? If you're on a passenger jet and an EMP hits, are you going to land the plane, or is it going into the ground?
Best guess is most of the planes would survive okay.
That's
Planes
good
are
to know.
extremely hardened. Modern commercial airliners are quad redundant. So even if you take out the primary electronics, there's redundant electronics that should get
Well,
you
you know,
down.
a lot of them aren't they fly by stick now? Like
Yeah,
the
they can do
Dreamliner?
all kind of methods of getting down. So I did research that at one time. The bigger
Or
question would
fly
be,
by wire. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Fly by wire.
right. But the question would be how many of the systems on the ground were still operational to guide you in, and they have all these backup methods of that too. I think it's I've been on a plane, by the way, that was hit by lightning one time. I don't know if you've ever been on one that's hit by lightning,
No.
but it's a frightening experience. We were riding in a 737 or something, and all of a sudden there's a really loud, really loud thunderous boom. And I swear there was a little bit of smoke that came up through the main cabin. That could be my imagination,
Oh,
but
I'd
I
have been
saw it.
saying my prayers, man.
Yeah,
That would
and
have
of course,
frightened me.
everybody, it was as silent as a whisper.
And while we're on jets, what about automobiles? We're on our way to Florida or
Yeah.
through Kansas, and the EMP detonates. Is my car going to keep going?
Well, so planes, I'd say, are okay. Most planes, I think, will be fine. Maybe some small planes might not, but I think large planes would. Automobiles are more iffy. The tests that the EMP Commission did showed that there is some susceptibility with vehicles, and especially in the case of a very powerful
They have a
EMP
bunch
wave.
of computers in a car now, right?
Yeah, now they're so computerized, it's not hard to believe that some of the cars are going to die, or at least be upset and lose power, and then you're going to have massive congestion of cars crashing on the interstates.
You know, I think, I'm an old gearhead guy, so the old mechanical fuel pump on the front of a 427 Chevy or Dodge 440. But now, I can't work on these new cars. Everything's electronic. I lift the hood and I'm going, what's this spaghetti stuff under here? And they have the electronic fuel pump that's right in the gas tank. And I'm thinking if it killed these new auto, it would be a nightmare. I mean, you won't be able to fix them. You won't be able to get parts.
Yeah, especially when there's hundreds of thousands or millions of cars all disabled at the same time. It'd be very difficult to be back operational.
So here's some more from this Epic Times article. It says, at a 2015 hearing before two subcommittees of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, George Baker, Professor Emeritus of Applied Science at James Madison University, said that there is no one in charge at the federal agency or at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, and North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, which collectively oversee and ensure the bulk transmission of power in the United States. So when I asked NERC officials about EMP protection, they informed me we don't do EMP. That's the DOD's, Department of Defense's responsibility, Baker said. The Department of Defense tells me EMP protection for civilian infrastructure is DHS's responsibility, Department of Homeland Security. And then when I talk to DHS, I get the answer that the protection should be done by the Department of Energy, since they are the infrastructure's sector-specific agency. So it's like they're all passing the buck, and no one's taking responsibility for this.
Yeah, that's scary.
This Peter Price spoke at the same hearing. He called the FERC and NERC extremely dysfunctional and questioned the ability and will of both organizations to protect U.S. citizens. He ultimately advised that Congress abolish both organizations and replace them with a new regulatory commission. His advice wasn't taken. For the next few years, reports by federal agencies continue to regard EMPs as low probability, high consequence. I don't think they're a low probability anymore. It's my opinion. Threat. That changed in 2019, however, when satellite imaging appeared to uncover secret EMP testing facility in China. Then President Donald Trump signed an executive order to bolster both civilian and military defense against EMP attacks, although the response to his order has been slow. And then I want to get to this hypersonic glide weapon that I just read about. And here's this 90% again. And I'm going to agree with you that I think this is high. I really think of the Amish that we have in the community up here, that the Amish are going to be fine, right?
They'll be fine, right?
Yeah. A 2000 statement by the EMP Commission cited Ambassador Henry Cooper, former director of the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative, who wrote that a high-altitude EMP blast could result in the shutdown of the U.S. electric grid for an indefinite period, leading to the death within a year of 90% of Americans. So there that is again. says, and I talk to people, they go, what is an EMP? And it says, few Americans have any idea what it is like to live without electricity, constant digital communication, or immediate access to medical or transportation services, which can be taken away by EMP weapons. Oh, that's a good question. What about trams that run on electricity? I like subways or something like that, or the what do you call the coaches in San Francisco that run with the overhead cable cars?
Yeah, I mean, you would expect those to have experience the same sorts of problems as any other infrastructure. So I would think they would have troubles.
This Kessler said it would create societal chaos and unpreparedness in a society that would be transitioned back to the 19th century way of life. I read, if I said that, William Frostgen or whatever, 1 second after.
Portion,
about, I think that was an EMP.
It was, yeah.
Where is this? Here it is. A key concern now is the potential role that new hypersonic weapons, such as those tested by the Chinese regime in July, might play into either delivering or concealing EMP weapons. The hypersonic weapon tested by the Chinese regime also reportedly launched, and I didn't know this, a second missile while in hypersonic flight. For example, and it is possible that such a system could be used in an EMP attack. Fisher said that such a system could be used to conceal a surprise EMP strike, but was unlikely to be used to directly launch an EMP strike, as the hypersonic vehicle travels at a lower altitude than is required by an EMP detonation, which may explain why their glide vehicle launched this other missile. If the second missile that originated from the hypersonic vehicle went to a higher altitude, however, it could theoretically field an EMP bomb. So, and that was my question. I was trying to search today what our airspace is over the United States. If I take it that if China or North Korea or any other country wants to fly in space over America, we can't stop them.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think we can regulate essentially satellites going overhead and things like that.
And this was something you alluded to earlier. This Peter Pry warned in 2015 that EMPs would not be used alone, but in conjunction with sabotage and information and cyber warfare initiatives designed to wholly overwhelm and stun the U.S. defense system. He referred to the strategy as the new Blitzkrieg, a reference to the Nazi strategy of lightning warfare during World War II, in which German tanks, planes, and artillery would quickly swarm and incapacitate Allied defenses. So that was kind of a long article, but it was a really good article. And that was just posted 2 days ago, I think.
Hypersonic missiles in particular are really in the news right now because of China's recent demonstration.
You know what was scary about that to me? Was that it caught our military intelligence off guard. They were taken aback by it.
They were. Yeah, clearly they were startled by it.
Now, you work at NASA, so I would think, you probably know some stuff that we don't. But was NASA even rocked by that or not?
I didn't hear any rumor of it in NASA or any discussion of it. It's sort of outside the purview of what I work in.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
risk with hypersonics is they fly so fast. They might fly at 4,000 miles an hour compared to cruise missiles might be 500 and something miles an hour. So they're just super, super fast. And they can change direction very quickly and change altitude very quickly. So they're very hard to hit. They can come from all kind of directions that you don't normally see missiles come from.
It's hard to shoot down something with a missile that's going 6 times the speed of sound.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yep.
So they may be invincible. And then I hear about these super cavitating torpedoes. Which are you aware of these?
No, I'm not. I've heard the words, but I don't know.
Kind of what I understand is they take a little of the exhaust, they're like rocket powered or whatever, and they're blowing it through the center of the nose cone. So it's creating an air pocket, and it's just kind of, and they're incredibly fast. So a couple more things. I don't want to hold you too late, but do you have a minute yet?
Sure.
Okay. This is another short article by Epic Times. This is by Catabella Roberts, November 26th, so just over a week ago. Headline, U.S. vulnerable to electromagnetic attack from adversaries such as China, North Korea. Experts I won't get into some of the stuff we already covered. You know, I kind of take it with this paragraph. While not deadly on its own, an EMP attack can ruin most electronics. Well, if it's going to kill half or more of the United States, I would say it's kind of deadly on its own.
Yeah.
I don't think I need to get in, unless there's something here I see. I think we get the gist of who are America's enemies. I'm going to say that Russia and China have super EMPs. North Korea, maybe because I think they have some. They could be close if they don't have them. I believe they have a missile that'll reach them over America, and they may have that technique. I mean, they did a nuclear underground test, remember, and part of a mountain range collapsed.
Yeah, they have nuclear technology and they have missile technology. The only thing that's not known yet is, are their missiles small enough to go into the warheads that go that high? I don't think anybody knows that yet. Because
that's another advancement of technology, is to miniaturize the weapon to where.
Right, exactly.
And then Iran, I think Iran is probably a nuclear nation, and we just don't know about it yet. I think North Korea caught us off guard, right? We knew they were working on nukes, and then all of a sudden they did a test.
Yeah, the difference between Iran and North Korea, in my mind, is Israel. Israel's not going to let Iran become a nuclear power, at least not an overt one. I think they'll go to war to prevent that.
I know they took
North Korea. There's nobody wanting to go to war with North Korea.
They assassinated one of their.
Yes.
And you know, that was a sophisticated attack.
Yes, it was.
They had like an auto gun with facial recognition in a van or something, and it picked him out and then opened up on him.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very sophisticated.
Yeah. Okay. So Israel will keep, I've told people when Iran says they want to blow Israel off the face of the earth, I take them at face value.
Oh, and I think Israel does too.
Right. And that's why they can never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
I don't think I need to get into this other article I had too. Let me see if anybody has any questions. So we're doing pretty good on time then. Anything you would like to add? I will tell this, disasterprepare.com, the website right there at the bottom of the imagery there. That is Dr. Bradley's website. Go there. He's got all kinds of Faraday, stuff to put your phones in. What do you call the little protective EMP pouches for your phone?
Yeah, we just call them EMP bags.
EMP bags, EMP protection for your house. Generators or not?
There's conductive cloth you can put over generators, or if you have a small generator, there's even some large bags that you can put the generator inside and close up.
Okay, and I just want to see if I missed some questions in the chat. If anybody has any questions in the chat, ask them now. Here's a good question. Some of our infrastructure things, I'm going to say they're not going to work, but what about our natural gas disbursement system, right? From the wellhead to the refining where they put the smell in it and stuff, and then pipe it off to the homes. What about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think once the blackout occurs, all the infrastructure would be hit pretty quickly, and you'd lose all your utilities pretty quickly.
Right. And I was reading about you. You like to hike and travel, and I see you like. Do you teach firearm training?
I don't teach it, but I'm an avid shooter.
Okay. So you have you exercise your 2A, let's call it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And would you consider I got to tell you, years ago there was we lived downstate in Michigan. There was this, they called them like the militia. There was this few guys, and they buried like Greyhound buses, and thought made like their bunker, and we heard they were storing food and stuff, right? It's maybe 25 years ago. That is mainstream now. I mean, the elites are building bunkers for millions of dollars.
I want one. Yeah.
I do too. I do too.
I've been in lots of them. I've checked them out. I've done testing of bunkers for various people, and I've always wanted to get a nice bunker to be able to retreat to. It's just they're expensive.
I see there's a guy in Texas. You probably know the guy. I've seen him on some of the shows. he builds a really nice bunker system with the air recirculating
Yeah,
and stuff.
recirculating air and all that. Yeah.
And I would like one. But they're like I don't know, 150 grand or somewhere. And then you can go up to millions, right? If you want.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll find our way into a bunker. Who knows?
Right. But we're I tell everybody right now, and I try not to fear monger. I'm just telling people what I believe, that in the world we're living in right now, what I see happening with like my opinion, the dollar has got some real issues. The spending in this country, the supply lines breaking down, adversaries that are that I don't trust China. I like the people I have no problem with. I don't like the communist Maoist government. But we're living in a dangerous world. And the idea, and I'm a real estate broker, by the way, I've been in hundreds of homes, right? I've looked in hundreds of refrigerators and kitchens. People have a week's worth of food. That's what's in their house. And I think that's not real smart. I think people need to be prepping and fill their pantry and get this long-term food, that keeps for 20, 25 years, to build Faraday cages. And you look, a lot of people can't afford to do this overnight, but you do it over time, right?
Yeah, it's a journey. Sure.
And do you think everybody should kind of be in prepper mode? I guess that was my question.
Yeah, I wrote a book called The Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family. And it's all focused on how you take practical preparations, not the hardcore dive down into the bunker and live, away from everybody, but how you start a food storage plan, how do you do water filtration and water storage, just sort of the basics of having, so that you're so that you're independent. I mean, you can take care of your family without relying on other people if things go bad.
So if they go to disasterprepare.com and then I see your books there. Yeah. And I got to tell you something. It took me 13 years to write my novel. I'm looking at all these books do you sleep at all or what?
For about 5 years, I went crazy writing, but last couple of years, you're right, I've been sleeping now. So I've caught up on my sleep.
So what's the title of that book? Cause that's a great book.
That's the most popular book I have. It's The Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness.
Can I pull it up real quick?
Yeah, you can go on Amazon or you can go on that website, but
let me pull it up so they can see it. I still got your website right here.
Yeah. And it's a big book. It's like 450 pages. It's a big voluminous book, but it has a lot of good information in it.
All right. So here we are. I'm going to go to books. Handbook to Preparedness. Is it that one?
Click on that one right there.
Okay. Is it going to show the cover or no?
I know it didn't. That seemed like a dead link. I'm not sure why that is. They must have a website issue. You can also just find it on Amazon. Just search Bradley Preparedness. It'll pop right up.
Okay. All right. Let me
I'm not sure why.
Let me see if anybody, and I want to thank you again so much for joining in. I mean, I've heard all these scenarios about EMPs, and I will tell you from talking to you, a lot of it, my fears are true, that it's gonna, and if you take out, let's say a good scenario is you take out 60% of the grid, and the worst scenario is it completely takes out the grid. If it takes out 60% of the grid, is it going to overload what remains and take that out?
My guess is that you'd end up with regions of, we have our grid broken into different regions, right? And so my guess is that some of those would collapse on themselves and others the other co-ops might still be able to operate. So you might end up with portions of the country that had power and portions that didn't. But as you can imagine, the portions that did are not going to want everybody migrating in there, because they'd be just in bad shape if everybody starts migrating there. So
and I heard the figures to harden the American civilian grid, and for what Washington spends. A matter of fact, in this one article that I didn't read the last sentence, but it said part of this, I call it the non-infrastructure bill, but the infrastructure bill that just passed for 1 point some trillion. He said, I think some of this infrastructure should go to hardening the grid. Of this money. I think this should be like a top priority for our government.
Hey, you're preaching to the choir. Yeah, I would agree with you. It wouldn't take that much money probably to do it either. So
independent many would like to know, what about 5G? Would that all get shut down by an EMP? So cell towers. So let's say I protect my cell phone in the Faraday bag or whatever, right? Are the cell towers all toast?
Could be. It could be that saving your cell phone didn't do you any good, because certainly the cell systems are going to be, there's going to be a lot of damage there. And if the grid goes down, they have generators to run for some period of time. But the thing about it is with EMP preparedness, you don't know what's going to go down and what's not going to go down. You don't know what's, how bad it's going to be in different areas. So you want to have options. And that's what I always tell people, by storing different things away. Yes, you're right. Maybe that will ultimately be useless to you, but it's nice to have options. That's why people keep backup generators and things like that.
Yeah, we got one. I went to, there was a Black Friday sale like 5 years ago at Menards. And these generators, the little small, like 45 or 5,000 peak, they were really cheap. So I went and bought 3 of them. I sold 2 of them, so I got the 3rd one for free. It's still in the cardboard box. And I wrapped the box in tinfoil with that, with the aluminum tape or whatever.
Sure.
Is that going to protect it?
Yeah, that does great, actually. It's a good way to do it.
So somebody, Sting wants to know, what about boats? What about, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. What about chainsaws, boats, lawnmowers?
Yeah. So,
stuff like that.
Yeah. The rule of thumb is if it has control electronics in it, solid state control electronics, which most boats do, then you could certainly have damage to them. I kind of compare a boat to a simple car, if you will. Cars, I think, have more electronics, sophisticated electronics, but still it could be damaged. They have GPS systems and things like that that could go down. Chainsaws and other things, like, my power drill is not likely to be damaged because it's a pretty simple thing. Its electronics are pretty simple. The more complicated the electronics, the more likely it is to get damaged, really.
Rick Trent wants to know, he says, did he mention the car protector you can plug into the car cigarette lighter?
Yeah, I haven't mentioned that. It's on the website. It's called a TRAP, TRAP, which stands for Transient Reducing Auxiliary Plug. And I do a few videos on how that works. It's basically a surge protection device that you can plug into your cigarette lighter, and it helps to provide some protection from an EMP. And I go through all of the different methods. I do some testing on it and stuff. It's a neat product. I came up with it, I guess, about a year ago. It's a small cigarette lighter sized product that you can put in your cigarette lighter, and it shunts extra energy that gets into the cable assemblies from, let's say, an EMP. And that was something across your battery, and maybe a couple of those traps in your car. They help to provide little sinks for energy that would give your chance a much better odds.
Doctor, are the things that go on your battery cable similar but smaller than what goes on the power box of your house, or the
the ones that go on the automobile main power wires are very similar to the ones that go on the house. They're slightly different, and because they have different levels of current in them, but yes, they're very similar in their function. They clip around the main battery wires that go off to your fuse panel, your fuse box in the car.
And I take it they're not real expensive.
They're not. They're like $49. So a pair of them is $98.
Well, I'm going to tell you, a running operating vehicle during the apocalypse would be nice to have.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of concerns, people say, well, yeah, but there won't be any gas, but again, it's about having options, right? I mean, you can siphon gas from other vehicles and things that are not operational. Again, you got to have options. So,
right. My thinking, folks, with this is what I tell everybody, everybody's a fool right now to not be prepping. And I put it this way. If you own a home, you have fire insurance. If you're renting, you probably have renter insurance. If you have a car, you have car insurance. We have health insurance. Why would we not have food insurance? And just be prepping? I can tell you that my wife and I took us a while to get back, but we're back up to a good year. I'm sure we could survive now. And I'm going to tell you, I sleep just fine at night, and nothing's going to go to waste, right? We just have, we've built up, it's like a squirrel storing nuts for the winter, right? I'm really concerned, and I want everybody to be prepping and getting ready, because, and unfortunately, FEMA, the government, tells you to have a 72-hour kit. You won't survive a Michigan blizzard with a 72-hour kit. I'm just going through the questions and seeing if anybody else has got something. Independent Minnie, she's one of the mods here. She put the link in the chat here for the doctor's book, Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness. I think I'm going to buy that, by the way. Let me look here. Thank you, Bill and Dr. Bradley. Well, thank Dr. Bradley. This has been very informative. Yes, it has. Let me see here. Satellite phones. Expert G has that question. Same thing, right? Electronics.
Yeah. And phones in particular, anything with an antenna, you could pretty much believe is going to be damaged, because antenna's job is to pull in, RF energy, and not to the level of what an EMP would be. So it's very likely things with antennas would be the first things damaged.
Johnny W. Strahan, I think you answered this earlier, but how long does the EMP wave last? The first two are really quick. The third one.
The third one can last even up to hours, where you end up with these ground currents flowing around on the wires. So yeah, the short answer is it could last minutes to hours.
There was a question here, K-Skull 007. What type of electronics might not be affected?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things that don't have solid state electronics, like what we were talking about. If you're, like a motor is not going to be damaged. It's not. We're talking about a brief amount of energy that would be put into a motor. Anything that has solid state displays, like digital displays, those things have little control and processors in them. But simple electronics with just, motors and moving pieces and stuff, you're not able to inject enough energy to damage them.
How about, old car that's points and condensers?
Not likely to be damaged. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Old diesel tractors and stuff like that.
Same thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Expert G, I think he answered this, but will the satellites be affected if you protect the phone?
Not necessarily. It depends on where the satellites are in position to the EMP, right? You certainly can damage satellites with an EMP. Although I will tell you, many satellites are very heavily tested for electromagnetic energy to make sure they'll survive. We do all kinds of testing like that when we work at NASA satellites. Everything has to be very well tested for its electromagnetic compatibility. So some would survive, and certainly if they're not in the range of the view of the EMP, they would survive. So
CB radios. Somebody has a question. CB radios.
Yeah, again, not likely to survive unless they're put inside of a Faraday cage.
I have maybe 8 or 10 or 12 and a brand new CB base station. I bought. Remember, it was a big thing in the 70s, right? The CB.
Oh yeah.
So I bought them and I protected them in a Faraday cage. And my thinking was, if things ever go haywire because they run off 12 volts, I'm going to give them to my neighbors and hook up my base station, and we would have communication. And somebody brought up what I was just going to say. Just recently, out of the blue, Russia had a defunct. You've seen that, right?
I did. Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, you work at NASA's. That seems like an incredible feat to launch a missile and hit a moving satellite.
Yeah, I think it's not as hard as you. I think we possess that ability to do that. We do, as well as China and Russia.
They blew a bunch of debris into outer.
Yes, they did. They made a huge, big mess.
Right.
And they knew they were going to make a mess. So it was a statement as much as anything, in my opinion. Right. They were making a statement.
And that's letting them know we can take out your satellites.
Exactly.
And then I read an article too where Russia had satellites that moved to where they could get in the way of another satellite.
I read that as well. Yeah. And they could force collisions and things like that.
Renee
caused all kind of mess in space, I'm sure.
Yeah. What about, we do everything in our world now, this just in time shipping to get, I worked at a grocery store when I was in high school, half a day, Schoenberger's Market downtown Scottville, Spartan store, 2 floors, an old small town American, old 2-story building. And there was a conveyor belt, and the Spartan truck would come in and we would run up all that extra stock upstairs. We might have 20 cases of green beans.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore, right? What you see on the shelves is what they have.
Pretty much it. Yeah. It's that just in time. It saves a lot on losing product, right? Where things go bad or things don't get sold. So now they can get it just in time, and what you see is what you get, basically.
Right. So my thing is, folks, if we get hit, God forbid, by an EMP, and I was going to ask you, can you take out the grid with a cyber attack?
Probably not the whole grid. You could take out one of the interconnects if you were really successful.
But nothing like an EMP.
No, I don't think it would pose that threat. Although I do think cyber attacks are very real and very dangerous. I don't think it's quite a national threat like that would be.
Right. So the trucking industry, the modern trucks, I take it they've got all these computers like cars.
Yeah.
Now diesels run a little different, right? Because they're igniting on compression.
Yeah, their mechanism of the engine itself is different, but a lot of them still have solid state control electronics in them.
This is a thing I hear from a lot of my friends. Independent Mini wants to know.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know any would know to answer.
I know a bit.
Is
Yeah.
5G a threat to our health?
Well, the short answer is no one knows for certain.
That's scary, and we're putting it out there.
And we're using it. My guess is, if you ask me, I would say no. I don't think it's going to prove to be a major health threat. But I will just leave it at the fact that no one really knows for certain. It just hasn't
we were
been around
watching
long
this
enough.
show yesterday. My wife found on YouTube, really interesting, by the way. Maybe Pennsylvania Dutch Amish. This guy spent a weekend with them, and he thinks he was talking about the bee population, and he thinks it's the cell phones. This Amish guy that's messing with the bees. So I don't know if that's true. It was just
I've heard that. I don't know either. The whole bee thing is a very complicated study.
Let me see if we got any more questions. And what was that? I don't know what that is. With having a personal robot, I'm not even going to ask. I don't know what that is.
That's someone having fun.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Expert G wonders. We always hear about these near miss asteroids. This is a little off topic, but
yeah.
Is it possible to nudge an asteroid and get it out of our path? I know NASA's working on this.
Yeah, they just recently launched, is it the DART, I think it was called, on a satellite essentially to go and impact with an asteroid to show that they could do that.
Okay.
It is an area of study. It's actually fascinating because it's only a matter of time before we do detect a large asteroid coming our way. And then the question is, will we have enough time to build, the equipment to go up there and try and move it off its course without, sending it into the other part of the nation or of the world. So I don't know how practical that is to do, but I do know that the world is studying that question. And I think it's good that they are.
Well, there's cruising through here all the time, right? I mean, there's a thought that what was it, Yucatan Peninsula? Where is it that big asteroid hit Earth in the Gulf and killed off the dinosaurs, right?
Yeah.
Is a theory, at least.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's it, Doc.
Right.
I don't see any new questions. We are a little over an hour and 20 minutes. I appreciate it so much.
Sure. Happy to be on.
Everybody go to the doctor's website and buy some books and some EMP protection. I can tell you, I'm going to get the surge protector for my panel, which you don't sell, but you where do I find that? Amazon?
You can get it at Amazon or Lowe's or Home Depot.
And what was that again? What's the name of it?
It's called the Siemens, SIEMENS, FS140. Siemens FS140.
Okay. And then get the collars. What are those
get
called?
3 of those whole house ferrites.
Yep. And then I think I'm going to get the ones, because the ones for my cars, I can just flip from car to car, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't need to sell them with the car.
Right.
Great information. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Sure.
Please share this video, folks, and get the word out there so people can be aware of, one more reason to not sleep good at night. But I tell everybody, we live in all this stuff we can prepare for it, right? We can protect our generators. We can have extra fuel on hand. And it's just one more thing we got to prep for, but we can get through this, but it's going to be a lot harder for people that aren't paying attention. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.